Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. My name is Ryan.
And I'm experiencing existential dread.
And joining us today on this special episode, we have Josh Domanski of Liminal Horror. How you doing today, Josh?
Oh, just living the dream.
Aren't we fucking all right now?
Yeah.
The world is totally fine. Nothing's on fire and everything's gravy, right? If you're looking at us on the YouTubes or live right now, you'll notice this is not our normal window because this is not a normal episode. As I said, we're going to have Josh Domanski on today. We're going to be talking about Liminal Horror Deluxe Edition. We've talked about Liminal Horror a bunch. We've had Josh on a bunch. If you haven't seen any of the writing seminars, you should definitely go check those out. Go check out the APs for it. I'll make sure to... At this point, I should almost make a playlist of just all the Liminal Horror stuff. But today, we're talking about the upcoming project, Liminal Horror Deluxe Edition, something that's been in the works for a while, that I've been looking forward to for a long time. And Josh is here to chat about that a little bit. So let's chat about it a little bit.
Yeah. So we've been working on this a while, at least in terms of the writing. I think we're going on almost 2 years at this point from when we started. We ended up having to take a break for a few months to get, the Parthenogenesis of Hungry Hollow out, but we've kind of been pushing this along for a while here. We have the Backerkit page that is, you can follow along right now. Presumably by the time this hits YouTube, it'll be a little closer to when we launch the actual Backerkit, which is 15th, I believe. But we wanted to take the opportunity to kind of do a little deeper dive into what this book is going to be than what you'll end up seeing on like the page itself. So we've got a little bit of a breakdown of the parts here. I brought some of the sample layout to kind of show off, just so that folks can kind of, we run through this, we chat a little bit about it, and then we can get a pretty good idea about what you're backing if the page itself doesn't convince you for some reason.
Awesome. I mean, I'm sold right now. So
yeah, I was sold a long time ago. But for those that might not be, I'm very excited to see this and hear what people have to say for it. So,
all right, shall we get into it?
Yes, we are.
No.
We are.
No.
Look at this. Look at this.
Yes, all right. I have no idea what the screen looks like. First off, we got our new logos. We've got Zach Hazard on as our primary artist and art director for Liminal Horror going forward. He's fucking kicking ass at a lot of stuff here, and these are some logos that he came up with. That's going to be the new sort of face of Liminal Horror, at least as we push into the future.
amazing decision.
Yeah. Zach has been a part of Liminal Horror from the start. He did the first cover for the original zine of Liminal Horror. I think that may have been the first piece of tabletop RPG art that he's ever done, but I don't know if I can verify that. At least in an official capacity. And so Zach has kind of been a part of, everything ongoing forward from there too. I'm pretty sure every major release has something from him in it, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know, 6 to 8 months ago, we kind of made the decision we're going to bring him on as art director, kind of push forward, be officially part of the team rather than just kind of like unofficially part of the team. And he was always going to do the art for the deluxe edition anyway, so it just kind of ended up working out real nice, especially in our favor because this shit fucking rocks.
Very much so.
Let me get back into that. All right, so getting into what we're doing here. The base system for Liminal Horror has been out a while. The first zine came out in 2021. It's a rules light survival horror RPG. We have a website. You can get it for free. You can get the PDF for the zine for free, and you can currently get the base zine at Space Penguin Inc., who we swapped to I think a couple of years ago at this point. So from basically the very start, the idea was always to kind of build upon that zine. Goblin Archives is the one who wrote the original Liminal Horror. I didn't join on the team for another 6 or so months, I think, after the original zine released. But basically from the start, as soon as I joined on, we've been talking about ways in which to elevate the system and bring it forward. The initial way that we started doing this was through a series of modules and zines, get supplementary material out, get people playing it. So you see the Mall, the Bureau, the Bloom are, sort of the first three of those big zines that we've put out there. We later began the process of upgrading to what becomes the deluxe edition. We had started that prior to the introduction of the Investigators edition of Liminal Horror. This was sort of a stopgap where we had already started working on what is now known as the deluxe edition. We'd basically rewritten the original zine to tidy it up, fix a few things, but not really diverge from it in any serious capacity. We added wounds to it. That's sort of the biggest deal there. And then I think a few things were kind of clarified in the zine. So everything in the Investigators edition is basically the same as what was in the core, but it's a little better. So we moved into the zine. We'd already begun the transition there. So we came up with the idea to do, the deluxe edition. The first thought was to sort of follow along in the footsteps of Mothership. The folks at Tuesday Night Games have been a huge inspiration for us, especially on like the zine front, the module front, and how they sort of build a community and run their business and whatnot. So it was an easy model. By the time the Mothership box set hits Kickstarter, we were kind of like, what does our box set look like? The problem, I guess. One of the things that Mothership continues to struggle with, though, is its formatting. Whereas I really love Mothership zines. I think it works for the aesthetic. I think it works for the box and everything like that comes together. Mothership does I'm not going to say poor job. That's a really bad way to describe it. Because of their limited format, they don't have a lot of space in which to explain how the game is meant to be played. It's totally fine for somebody who, like me, who was already kind of used to that culture of play, who comes in and plays Mothership. I immediately know how this game is meant to be played. But, I go on Reddit every day and I see people kind of struggling with some of the basic aspects of the system there, especially if they're coming in from first time. And a lot of that has to do with, the constrained space. The Warden Operation Manual for Mothership is one of the best RPG books I've ever owned. It still has like 2 or 3 sections in it that I really wish were present, or sections that could be present, to help kind of better orient people for running the game, and especially like making their own content for the game that they could bring to their tables. So we had seen that. We really liked that box set, but we were like, if we do the same thing, if we copy this design, one, it's going to be a production nightmare, and two,
yeah, I mean, it was for them. Box. So
yeah. Yeah, and two, we would be limiting ourselves. We wanted to make something that was better than the original zine for Liminal Horror. So hardcover was an easy choice. We've taken that base and we've expanded it. The big thing here is the deluxe edition isn't a second edition. That was never the intention. Everything that we have written so far is going to be compatible going forward. We want to support the same core system, whether you have the first zine for Liminal Horror, the Investigators edition, the deluxe edition, or using the free rules on the website, or trying to maintain, that compatibility or whatever. So nothing is obsolete. But the key here with this deluxe edition is that we wanted to focus really heavily on getting you to the table. Everything in this book is designed to get horror at your table, whether that makes it easier for you, whether that's giving you the tools to learn how to run horror effectively, or just pitching the system in a way that's easier to pick up. So we've designed the book as a toolkit. We'll kind of talk a little bit about the sections here. I'll go through that as we progress. But the idea is, like I said, heavily focused, get this shit to the table, as opposed to being a book that sits in your collection and collects dust.
One thing, so the Investigators edition is now the base edition of the game, right? Like that is going to be like, or that currently is the core now.
Yeah. So the original zine, we can't reproduce because of some of our contractual obligations, what we've had previously. So we had moved to the Investigator edition as the base one. Like I said, it was a cleanup primarily, but it also kind of freed us from some of those concerns. But the key here, which I think is where you were leading, the Investigators edition is going to be a game that you can still take and bring to your table and run. The way that we think about it is the deluxe edition is the thing you read at home. You know, you have it there. It's got all these reference. It helps you build your scenarios. It helps you learn the game. And then when you come and run your game for your home group, you're just snagging the zine and running down and sitting at the table. So you don't have this fucking tome sitting there with you. You can just, you know, run clean from the zine. So the idea is that this will live on. The Investigator edition, we're going to continue to have it in existence. It's a cheap alternative to a fairly expensive book. And it's, again, not obsolete. We want you to hold on to your zines.
Perfect, because I have 2 of those. So yeah.
I think I have like 6 of them at this point.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. So, quick breakdown of what we got inside. We don't have an exact page count yet. We're going to be probably north of 350 pages for this total book here. It's going to make a lot more sense when I start talking about what we've included, because it's always like, this is a 350-page rules-like game. You know, it's a kind of a goofy fucking thing to say. But
you know what's here on the Weekly Scroll? We love those 350-page books.
Yeah, no criticisms here.
Yeah. So the core system, again, we're keeping that approachability. We want you to be able to pick the game up and, you know, be ready to run in like a half hour with characters. You know, you can quickly learn the rules and all that stuff. Everything is still preserved. It's still the same as the scene was. And then we just added a lot of stuff onto it. So I'll talk a little bit about the sections that we have here, but the book is broadly broken down into the Investigator's Guide, the Facilitator's Guide, the Catalog of the Strange, the Haunted Pacific Northwest, and a series of appendices. So first up is the Investigator's Guide. I don't really need to spend a whole lot of time talking about this one because this is just the original zine. You know, it's most of it, again, is the text that we had already had set up and ready for the Investigators edition. You know, it's like 40 or so pages of it. It gets you the basics. It gives you the character creation. It gives you the mechanics of the game to play. And then we have introduced ways to kind of quickly get to the table. The first is we have, you know, the standard liminal horror character generation. You get a background, and then there's a whole bunch of roll tables you can get to get more details, and blah 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 blah. So you can spend, you know, a half hour just crafting a character and making your best sort of, you know, horror protagonist that you desire. We've also provided a series of archetypes in the book here. Anybody who has read our modules would already be familiar with this. These are a little bit more robust backgrounds. It's, in a sense, we give you a couple of lines of text and some items and join those together in a theme. So you're able to, if you need to play in 5 minutes, roll stats, grab an archetype, you can get playing. You know, that gives you the basics to get your character going and pushing forward into the face of the horrors, as opposed to custom crafting someone specific. So we've got those 2 options to play. We expanded the equipment list a little bit, so you can spend your character's money on stuff right at the start, again, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty about the things that you have on you. And then the big thing, though, one of the changes is that we have reworked magic, and, you know, we're now calling it rituals. In the original release of Liminal Horror, the magic system there was, I believe it was pulled from Maze Rats. I don't remember off the top of my head because it's been a little bit since I've looked at it. But it was kind of this free-form sort of magic system here where players could wield magic if they so desired, and you kind of, you know, rolled on some tables to generate a spell. With rituals, well, first, we cut that from the Investigators edition. At that time, the magic didn't make a whole lot of sense with where Liminal Horror had been going. You know, we had already done the first 2 zines, you know, the Bureau and the Mall, and magic wasn't really fitting into that world in a, you know, great capacity, I should say. So when we came back to do this deluxe edition here, we had seen people like asking for it. It was one of the most common questions for people who had the original to the Investigators, is like, where did magic go? And it's like, well, we didn't really like it, so we cut it. But we've reintroduced it. We've kind of reorganized it. Again, it's this ritual system here where I I guess it kind of follows Vaults of Varn's magic system. That's probably the single biggest piece of inspiration. I guess maybe a little bit of what Karen had been doing too, but you get a spell title, you get a one sentence description, and then it's kind of free form from there. So we give you a little bit more direction there as opposed to like randomly generating the name of a spell and kind of working with it. And then rituals are kind of dangerous where it's not like free to cast. You are expending your hit protection effectively in order to wield these rituals, and then you can try and make it a little bit more powerful by risking more HP to do so, and so on and so forth. But again, they're probably going to be fairly rare in play, especially the type of play that we're trying to encourage. But we did it. We added the system back in here, and you got to, I don't know, I think 50 spells or whatever to screw around with. So
I think we played it on the stream, like 4 times at this point, maybe. I don't remember anyone ever using magic
nope,
through any of those streams at all. I didn't play in the Shelterwood Inn Liminal Horror side, but I don't remember anyone ever using magic.
Yeah, again, it's not really something that we write into it because it's not a fantasy system. We're trying to do modern survival horror, so things got to be a little more grounded. That's also the reason that we moved to rituals instead of magic, because of the idea that if we think of like Call of Cthulhu, because that's the elephant in the room whenever we're talking horror systems, you might have an ancient cult that has opened a book and is trying to do this ritual in there to summon a demon or something like that. So we wanted to make space for that option without making magic like a thing that characters are expected to wield.
I mean, rituals, it's vibier too for the liminal horror versus calling it magic. It makes you definitely feels like the source is more like occult and it's kind of satanic-ish a little bit more than just like arcane, Eldritch. Pulling from the ether or something. So
yeah. So you find a spell book from a cult, maybe you get a little magic in there. That's how you kind of wield it. Again, it works very similar to kind of the other stuff that we've got in the system too. So it's a little more unified mechanically at the very least. Let's see. All right. So getting into our second section here, our Facilitator's Guide. This was my baby. I've had my hands in the entire book, but this is the one thing that was like straight from my brain down onto the page. This is our GM's guide. That sort of makes sense here. It's broken into 3 sections here, but the general idea is that it is a series of essays and advice for running investigations and creating your own, kind of scenarios here for liminal horror. Again, we broke it down into running an investigation, creating a mystery, and adapting a mystery. That's broadly, the first section is, getting a little more nitty gritty into the system itself, talking about how to best utilize it, how to use your setting, so on and so forth. Creating a mystery is, I wouldn't call it a step-by-step process of creating a scenario, but if you used it as a step-by-step process, I think you would be in pretty good shape if you're trying to make your own stuff to bring to the table. And then adapting the mystery, what we wanted to include here was one, built-in system conversions. You can take one of the ones, for example, is we have a conversion notes for Mothership, where it's a quick, rough and dirty mechanical conversion here. We ended up adding that into our appendices, but we expanded on that idea a little bit for this adapting the mystery section, where we don't want to just talk about mechanical conversions, changing the stats from one system to the next. This section here is really about taking any existing story and bringing it to your table, whether that's you have like a book that you really like or a movie that you've seen, or again, you pull up a Call of Cthulhu module. So that section there is kind of like, it's only a handful of pages, so it's not the most robust thing in the world, but we are talking about using these frameworks of things that you draw inspiration from and adapting that for liminal horror. But one of the big things that we really wanted to focus on here was providing the support that you do not see in most RPG books. One of the big things here a section that took me quite a while to kind of figure out that I don't think I've ever seen in any tabletop book before, is how to write clues.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So let me shit, I lost it. I was have it pulled up somewhere else, but um so it's one of these things that is kind of critical to a lot of systems. Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, even like Brindlewood Bay, or the car from Brindlewood Systems, where they're heavily reliant on you following a series of clues in some regard. But those books don't do a great job of telling you how to write the clues. And they kind of expect that the GM is already kind of engrossed in that culture, and already has an understanding about what makes an effective clue. So we break down the various types of clues that you can provide, because it's not always the bloody handprint or whatever. There are other things that count as clues, and then we talk a little bit about how to utilize them, and what makes for sort of a bad clue, at least in terms of promoting the type of gameplay that liminal horror encourages. So a lot of our section is on that, stuff like that, at least. I know we've got a pretty detailed breakdown on how to make monsters for liminal horror. We talk about the doom clock. It's something that we put in a lot of our modules and adventures. And we didn't do a great job of explaining it. So here's a detailed breakdown of a doom clock and how to make one. We have a bunch of random encounter generation methods. We picked 3 of them that we kind of like, because it's going to vary depending on the type of scenario you want. So we detailed and describe how to utilize those. And again, hopefully it gives people a better understanding of some of the stuff that we've put in our modules too. But again, this is, just incredibly thorough series of tips and advice about how to run, horror games in general. To be honest, we wanted to extend just beyond just liminal horror itself. All right, so moving right along here, I'll have some examples of stuff that were put in the book a little later here. Those are the 2 sections were kind of quick, but so our 3rd section here is the catalog of the strange. This is our toolkit of ideas to kind of rip and steal for your own adventures here. It's a variety of weird and horrific entities. You get a bunch of objects and organizations and whatnot, and a lot of them are kind of intentionally interconnected through our setting, the haunted Pacific Northwest. But the idea is that, again, these are very modular, so they're not anchored to the setting by any means. So we have this broken down into roughly 5 sections here. There's factions, cults, horrors, resonant artifacts, and allies and adversaries. The factions are just big organizations that will have tangible impact on the environment. Folks who have read our stuff previously might recognize, the Bureau or the Church of Celestial Science. So big movers in the scene, organizations that are inherently connected to the horrors in some manner, with the idea being that these are sort of the secondary antagonists that you bring into your scenarios, where the horrors are obviously going to be the main focus, and then you grab one of these factions, you add them in, and things just kind of like get more chaotic. With our cults, the cults are serving a similar role, but the idea is that the factions are setting wide. The cults are like location specific, sort of smaller organizations that, again, can have a big impact, but they're kind of like focused on one specific thing compared to like the many focuses of a faction. The horrors are just what we're calling our monsters, because they're a variety of things that aren't necessarily like physical monsters. Resonant artifacts, we introduced these in the Bureau. They're basically magic items, but they have a little bit of lore connected to them that makes them feel a little bit more grounded in our setting. And then the allies and adversaries are it's a group of crafted NPCs that you can grab, take, and place into your games, either, again, to serve as an ally for your investigators or some antagonistic force. So these are people with like inventory and motivations, and a little bit more than just like a name and description.
Nice. A little Sam and Dean Winchester in there somewhere, for your cross country.
There are a number of references hidden throughout this book that someone might pick up on.
I really like how you guys are sectioning this book off into like all of this stuff could be kind of like sprinkled throughout, but like I think one of the criticisms that we talk about a lot on the show is like a lack of like delineation between sections like that, where you'll just find a bunch of stuff in one area, then a bunch of stuff in another area, and it's not really easy to parse. So having like all of the kind of like extra stuff that you can like build adventures and build campaigns and stuff with, like separated into its own like catalog of the strange and stuff like that, is a really great way to do it. Because I like if I want the rules, I just want the rules, and if I want the GM stuff, I just want the GM stuff. So it's really nice you guys are doing like hard separations between these sections.
Yeah, and again, I talked about it at the top. Our focus is a toolkit. We want this to be as easy to use as possible, so that we've thought a lot and reorganized a lot about how this structure is set up so that it's, you know, digestible. I do want to show off some of the clips here. We got a few of them. I think, yeah, I got 3 in this section here. These might be tweaked a little bit by the time we get to it, but it's a pretty good look at what our layout is going to look like at the end. This is specifically how we're setting up our monster kind of stat blocks, so to speak. And so I've got a few different examples here about the different ways that we're kind of approaching that, again, to try and make them easier to use. We did intentionally choose to use a very straightforward style of layout, and you'll see it in all these samples here. I could have spent a year just pounding away at the layout to make it look like this X-Files book with all this, you know, shit all over the place. Those books are great. I really love it when companies kind of do that, but you have to kind of do it well enough where it's hitting our other goals of being readable and easy to use. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there.
Well, it's interesting because like I don't know if have you seen like the Alien RPG?
Yeah.
So have you seen like the spreads for like the new Alien RPG?
Yeah. So they brought in Johan Noor to do the new one, and it's like they're doing exactly this, you know.
Yes. So it's funny because I loved like the black space background in the first one because it's very vibey, but I guess a lot of people didn't. So they're like, all right, we're just going to make it like a white background and more readable now, which is an interesting direction to go in. But I like that. I think if you're doing like a zine, having like a super vibey thing, or even like Merkborg, which is not a very big book, it's like what, like 70 pages or something like that, it makes sense. But for like a 350 page book to try to like make it vibes the whole way through is crazy. It's crazy.
It's a monumental
I think,
task.
Yeah, I think readability and usability, especially with that being like one of the primary directives that you guys have for this entire project. First of all, the layout looks great anyway. This is kind of the same layout you've been doing for a while. But if I'm reading that many pages, the stimulation in my brain, like I'm good with you know, pretty straightforward. I think that's a really, really great choice.
Yeah. And when it comes to, you know, basically what you're saying there, you know, like we take the Bloom, for example. I love this module. I love everything we did with it. It took fucking forever to do the layout for because I went in and, you know, we did the little custom graphics and all that shit in there. When it came to doing the zine here, we wanted to do you know, a sandbox setting in 40 pages. We needed that extra stuff to do what our writing could not do because we didn't have the pages for it. So we can establish the vibe by making this look like a notebook you found on the ground, just filled with the full RPG thing, and that fills in some of the gaps we can't write. We have in the deluxe edition unlimited space for all intents and purposes. So we don't need to do all that extra stuff. And, you know, you look at like Delta Green. Delta Green, actually, I like the layout in that book quite a lot. They did the government files thing there, I think, in a really smart way where they're only using that sparingly throughout the book. And it's not like the whole thing.
Yeah.
They also have a lot more time and money than we do. So and yeah, we could have copied it, but whatever. Again, a very intentional choice to make this as easy to read and use as possible here. And again, I still think it looks nice. I'm really happy with how what we're doing on the layout here. So it's a good middle ground that I think we found.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, real quick,
but-
are you doing A5 or A4 for this?
It is a U.S. trade, which is a 6x9.
Gotcha. So like American A5, it's not. So 300. That's a thick little book. 350 page, like
be
like my
6x9. Yeah.
We made this choice because this is my favorite format, and I'm insistent. But if you have Hungry Hollow, it's the same dimensions as that book. In theory, all of our hardcover books are going to be that size going forward. We'll see how much we commit to that.
I mean, it's an ideal size, like the 6x9 or the A5 or whatever. Like that size of book and zine in general is just perfect.
Yeah, it's I really dislike the full letter A4 hardcover books. It's not that they aren't great product in the end. It is that they become a hindrance to use the larger the book gets.
Yeah,
Unwieldy, yeah.
It's one of those things where me specifically, I have a square foot of desk space when I'm running games at my desk here. It's like, I can't open those fucking books, keep it to the page, and use the stuff on my desk. So, going with a smaller format is to appease me specifically, but also I think it's just easier to use. Again, we focus, get the book to the table, use everything in here, and the easier we can make it, the smaller the format, that's going to help us out. But we do have a few choices that we could play around with there. We could use the half letter, the A5, or like B5, I think was the other option. I think the B5 is like the biggest I'm ever willing to go on a book that I design. But even that's still a little like obnoxious of a size. If you've got Academies of the Arcane and Andrew Kolb's books are in that size format. We could have done that. That would have given us a little more space. But again, it's just on the edge of irritating. So it's like 6x9 is like perfect.
Me and Ryan both looking back for Academies of the Arcane.
Yeah, it's just at arm's reach here. I'd grab it, but I've got a stack of shit sitting next to me. I think
Ryan's got to look in both directions.
Yeah.
You guys only see like
is a
some
similar
of these
size.
Oh yeah, they're B5. Yeah.
I don't think Swivers is actually B5. I think it's something a little different, but it's close. At least that's approximately what it's going to look like. Or what that size would look like in comparison. But I think if you guys own Best Stuff Buried Deeper, that's probably a good idea of what the end book will look like in terms of both the size and the page count. I think that's closer to 500 pages, so it's a little skinnier, but still, yeah, it's going to be a beefy boy.
This is 327 pages.
Oh shit! Okay, it's going to look a lot like that then.
It's gonna look very similar to this little beefy boy right here, which is a great book. I love this book. So,
yeah, book size.
That's a nice size. Yeah,
it's very book sized. Yeah.
But to kind of talk a little bit about our layout here, when we went to design our creatures, our horrors, that one of them we're looking at right here. Again, we wanted usability. The stat blocks for Liminal Horror are nothing. It's a line of text. You've got, strength, dex, control, HP, armor. If they have a weapon, attack, and if they have a little special ability, great. So we could do 600,000 of those if we really wanted to and pack them into this book. But again, we wanted to focus on something that is easy to digest and easy to use, easy to bring to the table. So we've been looking at a lot of other bestiaries. The Monster Overhaul is one of the big ones that we've had constantly open as we were working on this and writing it. We've also had the Folklore Bestiary from the Merry Mushman. That was another one that I really liked. That I think goes a little bit above and beyond your standard bestiary. So we took a lot of this inspiration as we were writing it, and we were like, how do we best support our monsters in a way that they can be taken and easily used at the table? And then we came up with this kind of format here, where this one in particular is a little atypical. Let me go to the next page here. That'll kind of give us a little better idea of what the standard block will look like, where you get your creature, you get your stats, you get any ability sets have a basic description of the creature that you could read verbatim at the table if you really wanted. And then we've got ways in which they can be leveraged in different ways. If we look at the warped here, we've got variants. If you're, let's say, solo role playing or don't really feel like making choices or just kind of randomly generating some stuff for an adventure, you pull up the warped, it looks like this is a base creature, but then you get some other stuff that you can utilize in a different manner. With those variants here, it can have extra limbs. It can be fused with metal and bone. It can have a tail with which it uses to, cling to the pipes above you in an abandoned factory. So again, we're taking our core monster, we're giving it a little bit of versatility by introducing these variants here. And then we got a little bit of narrative addition where how were they warped is one of the secondary table we have for this creature, where depending on what you choose, that might shape how you're using them in the scenario. If the warped is created through a corporation's toxic chemicals, that's going to play into how your investigation is set up here, as opposed to like resonant energies or cosmic radiation. You're dealing with very different things narratively, even if it is the same base creature. And then when you look at the we kind of flop back and forth depending on which monster it is and how we thought it'd be best to apply them. So when you look at like the dissonant artifacts here, dissonant artifacts are just like haunted objects, effectively.
Evil fridge.
Evil fridge, yeah. So we give you a table, that we get 12 different variants. But again, a dissonant artifact can be anything. It's just whenever you want to put like a poltergeist into your game. And then so we talk a little bit about what they are. They are related to the resonant artifacts in some manner. So we give the base description about how you might use them. We talk a little bit about like narratively how they might act. We talk about how a dissonant artifact has some simulacrum of life, which means it can be mad at you.
Angry evil fridge.
Yeah. So then that gives you right there one sentence. Dissonant artifacts possess some form of simulacrum of life. That gives you your roleplay aid, where it's like, okay, this thing is going to wreak vengeance upon you for fucking with it. And then we talk about manifestation, where you can find a dissonant artifact. And that's really just anywhere that the horrors are, because they are possess the type of energies that kind of create the horrors. Blah, 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 blah. But again, one page, you get a little bit of art, you get your stat block, and then you get ways in which you can kind of utilize them at the table. All in theory, in this way that's kind of easy to digest and understand. If we flip back to the shadow real quick, the shadow is, we're calling, we have lesser and greater horrors. That's two of our kind of breakdowns here. Lesser horrors are just like, basically these things here, standard monsters that you might fight. The greater horrors are like existential threats. And so the shadow is like, if this starts manifesting in your world, doomsday is going to come sooner rather than later unless the investigators do something about it. So we talk about the shadow in more of an abstract sense first, detailing what it is, how it spreads. And then we've got on, secondary page, once the shadow takes hold and starts converting people to its wills, it primarily manifests in two forms. So we have, column stat blocks for your two forms. Again, so, you just using these 2 pages with a few extra little bits and bobs, you can make a campaign just out of 2 pages. In theory, we did make a campaign out of 2 pages because the shadow is one of the primary antagonistic forces in the Bureau. So we took this core concept, smashed it with a building, and you've got, a 7 to 10 session arc that you can play out. And then we get into our resonant artifacts here. I don't think I need to talk about this a whole lot. These are just kind of like the weird items and stuff that you can find, things that are kind of infested with resonant energies. Not quite as destructive as the distant artifacts we just talked about a second ago, but these are more things that the investigators can find that can be used in a utilitarian sense, but are also kind of strange and mysterious.
So I really do love the progression of the layout from the previous versions to this. It feels cleaner, and I just like how it looks on the page.
Well, I like how it looks too. So.
Yeah, a compliment, Josh.
And so this is pretty much our guide for the rest of the book too. So a lot of it's going to look very similar to this as we push forward. But getting on to the next section here, the Haunted Pacific Northwest. So all of the liminal horror stuff that we write, official stuff is set within the Pacific Northwest in some manner. It's primarily like a personal preference. For one, Goblin Archives and we both live in the region, so it's just kind of fun to do stuff that's in our backyard. Two, it made a little bit more sense to keep things kind of constrained so that we could control them. So you've got, Washington, Oregon, and we don't really talk about it in the book, but the Pacific Northwest extends up into Canada a little bit too.
Yeah.
So you've got this region you can play with. There's plenty of shit that's going on here. We talk a little bit about why things are getting so bad just in this region. And that kind of gives you some ideas to extrapolate outward from that, things might get bad elsewhere too. So we're facing, we want to create the setting here. We also don't want to lock anybody into anything in terms of like lore or whatnot. So we've taken some very intentional steps here to make this setting like anti-canon, where we give you all of these details, and if you want to ignore every single one of them, it's not going to affect anything, at least in a strong manner. So we've been calling this a framework setting, where we're giving you the pieces to build upon to then make it your setting. This is done through, we give a little bit of an overview. We talk about why things are so bad here, or why things are getting worse here. And then we detailed 8 primary locations that are kind of spread throughout the Pacific Northwest. We got a couple of cities, we talk about Seattle and Portland. We talk about Coldwater, which I'll show a little bit more of in a second. And then we got a couple of outlying places kind of scattered throughout the rest of the region. Within those primary locations, we have included points of interest, NPCs to interact with, and crucially, investigation threads that you can pursue while you're at these places. Afterwards, after we talk about those, we talk about how you can integrate the existing modules that we have written already. And then we have detailed some ways in which you can create a campaign based upon the stuff in the book and the modules that we have produced. So we set you up, we give you some advice, but ultimately it's going to be you pulling all this stuff together and making it your setting here.
I love that. I also, as someone who also lives in the Pacific Northwest, I can speak to how unbelievably creepy it can be for no reason all of the time.
All right. So I do have, this is an old bit of layout that I was working with. I think that I did this in December, so it's a little outdated here, but I got 2 slides here that kind of give you an idea of what that looks like in practice, where it sounds like a lot, but again, we're trying to be easy to digest and easy to use. So this is Coldwater. You might recognize Coldwater from the Bloom. This is one of our favorite settings to work in because it's just, it's a sleepy Pacific Northwest town that is trapped in the past, almost literally. So Coldwater, we have our little bit of an introduction, talks a little bit about what Coldwater is. Again, these are kind of written in such a way where you already know what Coldwater is like reading 2 paragraphs, because it's very stereotypical, and that's by design. We are going to do a map of the regions. We're going to do a map of all of them in some capacity to give you a little bit something more to grab onto. We haven't done that yet. That's coming. And then you've got your points of interests here, where we kind of wanted to spread this between things that are noteworthy that the investigators will be doing while they're at these places, and then like the spooky locations, where Coldwater is a good example of this because it's a pretty good spread. You have the Coldwater Cafe and the Lakeview Resort. That gives you the place you're going to eat when you come to town. That gives you the place you're going to sleep when you come to town. So your 2 kind of key bits of investigator like needs once you get there. And then the rest of it is kind of just like the weird shit that's happening around town, or at least connected to it, where Camp Coldwater has some campers that have gone missing. The bloom itself is kind of focused around that, at least for the onset. Coldwater Lake is just the Caldera Lake that sits on the edge of the town. It's a key part of the narrative aspect of it, but there's not a whole ton of interesting stuff going on there. And then we got the Pickman Lodge and the Hines Farm. The Pickman Lodge is where the Bureau intersects with the setting. So again, we've already talked about the Bureau in a previous section here. We can see, okay, now the Bureau has a presence in Coldwater. And then Hines Farm is where shit went down previously, and it might be one of the things you're investigating when you get to Coldwater. So again, you've got your introduction, you've got your locations here, you've got a little bit of map that puts them all into context with each other, so you can use these to run in your sessions. And then Coldwater's only 2 more pages, where we have our key NPCs and our investigation threads, where these are all people that we pulled from the Bloom. We've kind of reworked them, not really reworked them, but rewritten them to be more applicable to this general setting compared to the specific happenings there. So you have the mayor, the sheriff, the person who runs the diner, the 2 bureau agents, the minister for the Church of Celestial Science, adding in another one of our factions here. Again, using the space to play upon something we had previously written. And then you have the park ranger for Camp Coldwater. So again, putting somebody in the location we've just detailed. Each of these people have their own, fun things going on. They have their desires and their secrets, where it's a role play aid, where it's the thing that they want to do, the thing that they're going to be engaged in, and then the little secret thing that the investigators might find out about. Talking about, Angela and Brett, for the Bureau agents, it is a secret that they are agents of the Bureau because they're undercover. But if you start looking into them, it won't be that hard to find out. What the actual secret is that they've both been infected by the shadow, which we just talked about a minute ago, and they're going to make things worse in Coldwater if they're not managed. So again, using the space we have, limited things, easy to use, calling back to other stuff in our book, a constant series of references here to build what I like to call the web of information. And then we get into our investigation threads, where we knew we were getting into a huge book here. We're already going to have scenarios. We didn't want to write a scenario for Coldwater completely, front to back, even though we do have a scenario for Coldwater in the book. I'll talk about that later. So with our investigation threads, we wanted to, again, leverage our web of information, give you 2 things that you can build your adventure out of in each of these locations. So for Coldwater, we have the Coldwater Lake incident and what we're calling a creeping terror. The Coldwater Lake incident is if you want to go into the shadow, this is giving you a place to go do that. Coldwater has already been fucked up by this, and it's going to happen again, at least according to this investigation thread. So we give you the basic details. This is what's going on. This is how you get your investigators involved. We provide a series of clues that they can follow. Again, this is not really prescriptive. It's just things to keep in mind as they are pushing into the setting we've just detailed. And then we're linking additional resources that you can then pull from the rest of the book to build out this scenario into a proper scenario. We look at the creeping terror. A creeping terror really just sets up the Bloom. We wrote it out in a little more of a generic way, but it's we're talking about the Bloom there. But so all of our major locations are going to have this same kind of setup here. We give the details, we give the points of interest, we give the NPCs, we give investigation threads. All of this stuff connects to what we have previously written. So you, in 30 minutes, can make 5 sessions worth of content. Just take your investigation thread, take your town, take your NPCs.
I love how usable this is, and I really appreciate how much you've folded in the Bloom and the Bureau and references to other things that then someone like I who has those things can extrapolate on. But you don't necessarily need those things to appreciate this little setup.
Yeah, that was again a pretty big focus here, where it's we are setting up the Bloom in this investigation thread, but you don't need to own the zine to do it. You could make up the scenario. We put everything that's in the Bloom is in this book, just in the sections. So you could rebuild that scenario without us having to do it. But if you do have the Bloom, here's some additional background. Here's some more things that you can do to make this better. Okay, then we're getting into our appendices here. So a couple things I want to talk about in regards to these guys. So the appendices is just like everything else, for the system. The stuff that we thought was going to be useful, but it didn't make much sense to kind of like inject it into the other chapters. These are supposed to be easier stuff to reference. One of the big ones is that we have a new series of optional mechanics that we are introducing. Instead of modifying liminal horror to make it more mechanically interesting, we've written these supplementary sections where you can use them if you want. The two big ones that we have, I think we have more than this, but the ones that are on my mind is we're calling the survival horror mechanics and the tactical combat mechanics. Survival horror is, we're already calling liminal horror survival horror RPG, but these additional mechanics are really focusing in on basically just like the resource management aspect of survival horror, where we give stuff for tracking weapon ammunition. It's not really a part of the basic liminal horror because we don't really care about it in the simplicity of the system. But if you do care about it, here's some mechanics. We talk a little bit about like crafting resources. You can go pick up shit on the ground and like tape it to your bat, and now your bat does a little more damage. Just like stuff like that. But again, we're trying to keep these easy, simple to use, and cohesive with what liminal horror already is. So powering through a couple of like small little things. Here's how you make it a little bit more robust if you want to focus on this stuff, but you don't have to. Then we've got the tactical combat mechanics are what I think is pretty interesting, and I'm probably going to use them going forward myself, where it's just breaking combat down into something a little bit more mechanized. It's probably the wrong way to describe it, but it's giving you a little bit more. Combat in liminal horror is pretty one note because the idea is that you're trying to do everything you can not to get into combat.
Makes sense.
So when the time combat comes, it's just bang, 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 you're dead.
Yeah.
So you're using every dirty trick available in order to kind of avoid it. But what if you don't want to avoid it? What if you want your Resident Evil 4 experience where you're going and you're giving fucking suplexes to zombies? Here you go. We got a little bit of maneuvers. We got a little bit of we break down combat into a new initiative system based around fast and slow actions, where if you want to act before the adversaries, you do a fast action, but it's just like one thing. And if you want to do more within your combat round, you can take a slow action and lets you kind of do like two things, stuff like that.
Cool.
The playtest worked out like really well, and I'm actually pretty excited about it. But again, it doesn't drag it down, which is the big thing. It's all just adding a little bit more complexity without slowing down the pace of the combat and without feeling like it's something different than liminal horror.
I love rules like tactical combat. Like just having like a couple more options just opens up so much, and that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's like the thing is all of these options are already present in liminal horror. It's just they're not obvious. Like you can grapple in liminal horror. You can, you can suplex. You can do all this stuff. It's just not in a way that is mechanically digestible because it's all following the same set of rules that the game is built upon. So when somebody's approaching this and they're expecting combat to be broken down in a little more traditional manner, they won't necessarily know that those options are there. But if you go read this book, hey, here's all these options that are just written out now in a way that you can use if they are useful to you. We also added character funnels in as part of our optional mechanics. I got my start writing zines for funnels for OSE, so I thought that would be a fun inclusion. But again, we ran a playtest of that. It went fucking spectacular. It's really just like you could run a funnel with limited horror characters. They're already dead simple. We're making them a little more simple so that you can make it a little easier. And then beyond that, our appendices have expanded resources. We've got new Fallout. We've got a bunch of new archetypes. We got a shitload of NPCs that we put into here. Just like a bunch of shit that you can supplement your existing stuff. And primarily, we put them here so it keeps the rest of the sections clear. Because we can go for pages and pages for NPCs, but it didn't make much sense to put them in the other section. We've broken down Fallout here in a couple of interesting ways where at the front of the book in the Investigator section, you're going to have a list of, I think, 12 Fallout that we have there that you can use, but they're really kind of random. Fallout is always tied to the horrors in some manner. It is the horrors trying to corrupt you. So it's not always great to have a random list of Fallouts because they might not be like narratively cohesive with the scenario you're running. So we've got that generic section up at the front. So what we've done with the appendices here is we've introduced a bunch more. We've broken them down into I think it's 66 tables. Something like that. I think we're still tweaking that a little bit too. But so you've got thematically linked Fallout now, whether you're like getting infected by something specific, or let's say your resonant artifact is giving you Fallout. So we've got these different sections here that you can kind of pull that are a little easier to use for what you need them to be, rather than being a random list. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a second here because I've got examples of it, but one of our big things is the generic locations. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute here. And then our final section for the appendices is just our reference aids. This is just a few pages in the back. It's like, here's the 1-page sheet to, look at the rules. Here's how to quickly create a character, like little stuff like that.
The best thing to have at the end of the book. I love it.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Yeah, and then I think I've got two. Yeah, I got 2 slides here for our generic locations. This was one of the things we wanted to do most with Liminal Horror, with this deluxe edition, where, again, focused, getting horror to the table. How do you do it? How do you build your scenarios? How do you quickly make a session? You have a half hour to prep. How do you get that to the table? You take a generic location, you add a monster, you add a reason that monster's at that location, you have an adventure, you have a session to play. So the generic locations, we've done the boring work for you. We make a little map, give you some general descriptions. Then you take that, you add the horror, and you have a session. So we're going to have I think like 30 of these. I don't remember the list off the top of my head. But they're all sort of thematically broken down into various categories where, this is the city, this is the countryside, this is, the sewers beneath the city, stuff like that. Where, again, the idea is modularity. Take these things. These are really common horror locations. We're here that we're showing on the page. You have your apartment complex and the apartment itself. So if you wanted to run Evil Dead Rise, let's say, like copy what happens in the movie, you get trapped in the floor of an apartment, but the monster's in your apartment with you and you need to deal with that. You can do this, 2 pages. You have your apartment that you can kind of fuck around with. You have the apartment complex floor. You can take some NPCs, use the cues that we give, add a couple of other interesting characters there, and then grab a monster, put that in one of the apartments, and then, find some reason that the floor is taken off. So again, you have this setup here. You just need the ideas. Take the other stuff in the book, do it. You got, like I said, 30 minutes worth of work, and you've got 4 hours worth of play. At 30 minutes at most.
I love this. This is by far maybe one of the most useful tools I've ever seen, because I cannot tell you how often I need generic locations, you need them for almost every single game, but to have them already pre-set up for you in the back, that's amazing. Actually, I love this. I understand why you wanted to get this in the book, because this is unbelievably immediately useful.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff that I like to run. I don't often run published adventures. I like to have NPCs with motivations, and I like to have locations, and the adventure is just kind of what the players do. So having this in the book where that's literally what you can do, and all the pieces you've already talked about, being able to maybe have a thread, have some locations, have some people, roll it all up, have this right in front of you and just go, is exactly how I would use it. So it's awesome.
One of the fun things too is that we do have some practical applications of this in the book, or at least that's the plan. We'll talk about stretch goals in a little bit, but I do want to kind of talk about one of them right now, where our stretch goals are adding scenarios into the book. One of them, Silent Street Station, it's kind of high on our stretch goals here, so we'll see if we get to it. But what that is going to do is we built a subway in our generic locations, take the subway and add a horror. We took a horror from the book, we smashed it together with the subway, and you've got a session to play. just out of those elements there. And we're kind of showing the application of it through one of the scenarios that, was included as a stretch goal. But what we also did in that scenario is we're writing ways in which you can expand it. And one of those expansions is taking what we have in our generic locations and adding it to it. So Silent Street Station is set in a subway. If you want 2 or 3 sessions out of it instead of 1 or 2 sessions, hey, that train leaves the station. Something's going to happen to that train, and now you're stuck in the tunnels. Go ahead and grab that sewer that we built for a generic location. And you've got a map. And you have the rest of your adventure. You can search the sewer as you're trying to find a way to escape back up to the main street. So there's 2 or 3 sessions worth of content. Just again using the base scenario, pulling the generic location, and adding in these extra little bits and bobs from the rest of the book. I will show off again. We got a couple more. This is the only other 2 ones we're showing off at the moment, but a medical facility and a school, again, pretty not standard, but pretty common places to have horrors. If you want to have your little Resident Evil type situation here with an evil scientist doing something spooky, grab your medical facility, grab a NPC that's might be the scientist doing it, and put a couple monsters in that medical facility. School's a pretty common place. Let's say there's a serial killer that's out there preying upon people at one of the schools. Now you got your school. Go ahead. We built a slasher, a generic monster that is supposed to be the 70s and 80s horror killer. Grab your slasher, put him in the school, grab some NPCs, whatever. So you've got that basic setup here. Again, with these generic locations, these are actually 2 really good examples of it too. We don't want to give you everything because we're trying to keep them all down to 1 page. Quick, easy to use references. So we give you the main stuff. In your medical facility, you get a lobby, the reception area. We detail a couple of the other rooms in there, like radiology, the operating suite, records room, and so on and so forth, that are kind of spread throughout. You can probably assume what's in the rest of these locations here just by some of the details we're given on the map. So you've got all of your patient rooms there. You've got what's clearly a meeting room in the top right corner. And so on and so forth. So you can kind of extrapolate from the little bit of information that we do provide. And the school is set up in the same way. You got to imagine a school is mostly going to be classrooms. So we talk about the things that aren't classrooms, and then you can, figure out the rest. It's not going to be that hard for you.
Yeah, this is great. I'm so stoked about that, actually.
Yeah, that seems to be the thing that people are most excited for, pretty much across the board whenever we talk about it.
You know?
All right, so we're getting toward the end of what I've got here. 2 more things to talk about. I think you guys are gonna like this one, the digital package. So this is going to probably kill us, but the deluxe edition is going to be as accessible as 2.5 or 3.5 person team can make it. So the one thing is hyperlinking the ever-living shit out of this book. We've built in, we've already built in page references in our manuscript, what the stuff that needs to be referenced, and we're going to have to go through that incredibly painstaking process of laying out the pages and hyperlinking everything in here so it's easy to use. Again, we're building that web of information. We have to support it now. So everything is clickable in theory when you get the PDFs. So you'll be able to kind of zoom throughout the book whenever you need to pull stuff together quickly. We're also planning on doing what we're calling modular play aids, but all that really means is taking the book and exporting specific sections of it that are going to be most useful to you. So we might have a PDF of just the scenarios, that you can pull out. So you don't need to open the whole book to do it. You can just quickly, I need to run this tonight. Here you go. I'm going to pull that out. Or it might be the modular mechanics from the appendices. We're kind of an export of just those. So if you don't want to use both survival horror and tactical combat, quickly grab the PDF for survival horror. You're already using the rest of the book. You've got it there, easy to reference. As part of the digital package, we're going to take all those maps that we've made and give them like individual files, clear backgrounds or transparent backgrounds so that you can either just paste them into a Word doc and print them out or drag them into your VTT. Easy to use. Again, we don't really have, like strict movement and tracking and all that bullshit, but sometimes you might want the map viewable to the player. So those will all be, exported. It's going to kill us because that sucks. They're all built into the template.
We will appreciate it.
Yeah. And then we're also planning on including solo play aids. Um, we're not really going to be including solo mechanics in the system, so to speak. There are a lot of really great like generators and ways to do solo play that already kind of exist. And to be honest, it's not really our forte as a team. I believe somebody's currently working on like a third party set of solo rules for liminal horror. Uh, so we don't need to necessarily make built-in solo rules for the game, but we want to help support people that are doing solo play. So the solo play aids are really just going to be like lists of tables and stuff. Whether we break those into the actual like tables broken out or just provide lists of where to find the tables is a little up in the air because we're still figuring this one out. But the idea being is that we want to give the people that are playing in this way something that will make their life at least a little easier compared to flipping through a 300-page book. When we get into the future, there are a few things that we want to do to kind of elevate the digital aspect of this game as well. One is to create a system reference document or something kind of like a Creative Commons document. We're still figuring out what this is going to look like, but we are pretty committed to doing it in the future. The idea being that we've written all this stuff for the book. We want people to use it. The big example is like we want to take the Bureau and put the Bureau into Creative Commons. The Bureau is a stand-in, evil government organization. So they're already kind of generic, even if we have given them some kind of neat specific details. But if you want to use the Bureau in your games, I want you to use the Bureau in the games. There's nothing you're going to do with them that I particularly would take offense to unless, you're doing like normal offensive stuff. Because the Bureau is written as a stand-in. So we don't need to be like protective of that because they're supposed to be generic. So we're going to give you the Bureau. Some of the other stuff, we were talking about putting monsters in there. We might do another faction. I think the Church of Celestial Science might end up in there, a little collection there as well. I want to put the town of Coldwater in there because that's another one of those things where it's like, Coldwater is intentionally supposed to be this generic, mountainside town. Again, it has all these details, but if you want to set your adventures in Coldwater, I would love to see what somebody else's Coldwater looks like. So we'll figure this out. This is a post-book problem, but the intention is to open things up a little bit so that we can kind of engage a little bit more directly with the community, and then people can create things that feel cohesive with what we're already working on. And then we also want to do a template in that same vein where we have created a liminal horror template in Affinity for the Horrors of the Americas game jam that's currently going on right now, where it's set up so you take your text, you import it in there, you export it. It's super basic 2-column layout, but it looks nice. I picked some pretty cool typefaces for it. So if you've never done anything like that before, as long as you get the program, bing, ba, boom. So we want to take that and make it a little more robust. Give it some different size options, make it like a proper template. It was really just like a weekend project for me to get something that was usable. So let's make it something that's a little more than usable. But again, this is future stuff. I don't know when I'm going to do it. It is in the works though. And then we can talk quickly about stretch goals. So we've just been lining up here. The ones that were going to be easiest for us were going to be the scenarios. We've already got a little bit of a start on them. We know what we want them to look like. So we're going to prop them up for you. 40K, we're talking, I think 30 is our funding goal right now. And some of these numbers might change as we get a little closer to the 15th because we're still tweaking things behind the scenes, especially when it comes to tariffs that might completely screw this whole project over. So our current plan right now, as it's set out, is to kind of split this up into this pretty tier structure here where adding in the scenarios into the book, giving you guys a little bit more something direct to play with as opposed to, the toolkit that we've got here. The first is the Camp Coldwater scenario. We played the proto version of that on this very channel a year and such ago, I think. It's been a minute.
Yeah. When was that, actually? Let's see.
Been a while, but so Camp Coldwater, we took the notes that I had that I'd put together for that adventure, and we're making that into like a real thing. We got a little bit of a preview right here. Cult classic. So King Cold Water is like a 1-session thing. It's your starter adventure. You can use it as an intro to the Bloom if you want. You can run it as a con. We've also given you some options for taking it a little bit further. Cold Classic is more of a slow burn investigation type of deal. You're going to so an actress has disappeared. It might be involved with the Church of Celestial Science, and you're going to go to the house of this director who's hosting a party that this actress is supposed to be present at. So you're going out there, you're interacting with a bunch of people. It's a big social sort of mystery thing that turns weird towards the end, but I don't want to spoil why. And then our third one here, or at least for the scenarios, is Silent Street Station. I talked a little bit about that before. Silent Street Station it's designed to be a funnel scenario to kind of support those funnel rules that we have, but it takes the some of our generic locations, adds a monster into it, and sets you up so you get a session worth of play. And again, I already talked about it, but you have additional options to expand that beyond that first session that are kind of written into the scenario itself. So we'll see how we do when it comes to these stretch goals. We're pretty optimistic based on some of the buzz that we're currently getting here, but some of that might be a little depressed given the state of the world. But let's say that we get well beyond this point and it meets our wildest dreams. We're already stretching, probably saying 100,000, but let's say it does spectacular. We've got some other stuff in mind, like our pie in the sky ideas, basically just like more scenarios. And more like cool things that we can add on here too. But so there's more that we have, kind of like toiling in the background, waiting for us to reach the point where we need to make it. The big thing is
October 20th, 2023.
Oh, I had it. I was waiting for a pause. So.
Oh, I wasn't. I just jumped in.
Yeah, so I think that is the one we're embedding on the Backerkit page, so folks will be able to kind of quickly go see it. But yeah, if you're watching this right now and you want a good example about what we want to be including in this book, go watch that actual play, because the scenario as it's written sticks pretty close to those original notes. So it's a good example. I lost my train of thought.
You're welcome.
So that's about it for me.
I'm so excited for this. I really am. I think this is a really great evolution of liminal horror, and I'm looking forward to the book. And I really like I run a lot of my games from my iPad while we're playing. So I really love like the modular aspect to the digital editions where I can just pull up the section that I need at the time without having to have the whole book open on my iPad. And the fact that I can hand out my like 3 copies of the Investigator edition and use that at my table as like the base rules. I really appreciate that because I have those and I'd like to keep using.
Yeah. And again, that's something that we're very intentionally trying to support as well. We have one of our tiers for the Backerkit is you get a copy of the hardcover and you get, I think it's 3 or 4 copies of the Investigators edition. So it's like, here's your hardcover, here's your player's books, you get your all in one package.
I really like that this is a deluxe edition, not like a second edition. Like, everything's backwards compatible, and it's really adding a bunch of tools, but also like collating a bunch of tools back into it and making it like super accessible and like you said, one of the prime directives being like playable and getting it to the table. So it's really great that it's more of an expansion and reorganization than anything that's going to be super new, but it's still like a lot of stuff,
Yeah. And again, it's liminal horror is a simple system. Like, we didn't need a second edition. We could tweak things. We like how Fallout and Wounds work. Wounds is technically an addition for the Investigators edition. That wasn't in the base game. So it's like we could do a little bit of modularity with it, but it's like, this is pulled from Into the Odd, and Into the Odd is like a really elegantly designed system. So what could we do to it, beyond adding in some modularity stuff? It didn't seem necessary, but we felt we could do something that elevated it beyond just the zine.
Somebody in the chat asked, which section of the book is the biggest section?
At the moment, it's the Catalog of the Strange. That's because, let me pull up this. So Catalog of the Strange has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factions. I think 7 cults. Then we have lesser horrors, which we have about 10 or 12 of those. We have greater horrors, which I think we have 8 of those. Resonant horrors, which I think we got another 8. And we're calling ritual users, but this is a small section talking about witches and warlocks and stuff like that, and trying to find a little bit of ways to interject that magic into it that we talked about earlier. And then we got 4 of what we're calling dead gods, which are sort of just like our cosmic horrors. But beyond that, there is those resonant artifacts we talked about in the allies and adversaries. The resonant artifacts, I think we got like 40 or 50 of them. They're quite a lot. And the allies and adversaries, we have 20 of those. So that section, the manuscript draft of that is like 140 pages, I think, right now. But that's going to be condensed down a little bit when we get it into layout, because we got that format that's going to like make our tables kind of shrink up a little bit. So the Catalog of Strange will probably be 100 pages or something in layout. So it'll be a good fourth of the book.
Say that's like a quarter to a third of the book. I mean, it makes sense. That's the toolkit section for like building out like all of the stuff you need for adventures and things. So it makes sense that that's kind of a big section.
It's also primarily the reason why we handed the draft into editing like 2 weeks ago compared to January. It's like I said, we've been working on this forever, and it just never felt complete for our goal. We wanted to create the ultimate horror toolkit or whatever. So we took a lot of like work to kind of figure out what that meant and what that ended up becoming. So part of that was scope creep. We keep adding horrors to it, but we wanted to make horrors that covered a wide array to give you more options for what you want to bring to the table. So I'll just talk a little bit about the lesser horrors right now, because I think that gives a good example of what I mean here, where we got reanimated dead, which they're zombies, but they are the same way that we set up those sample slides. Let me just go back to that real quick so we can kind of get a better idea of what I'm talking about here. Reanimated dead are, they are set up as zombies, but we've got like 8 different types that you can bring in, so they're not just zombies. Then we got ghosts. We got I think they're pronounced Golok, but I've never said that word out loud. But Golok are skeletons, where we put these in here to make it easier to convert. There's actually a lot of stuff like that too, where we've talked about how to take fantasy adventures and make them for liminal horror. So now we have a bunch of these creatures that fit within modern horror, but they are effectively stand-ins for these fantasy creatures. So like I said, zombies are pretty typical across the board, but ghosts and our skeleton stand-ins. We've talked about the warped days are right up on the screen here. We put in dogs, like spooky dogs that we're calling hounds. That can be, we got a couple different varieties of them too. There's a couple of fun ones in here. I wrote the creepers. The creeper was a it's a play on the Fresno Nightcrawler, where it's like the Fresno Nightcrawler is this. People that are like stupid into cryptids would know what this thing is, but it's like a ghostly pair of pants that wanders through. There's like 3 or 4 different videos of things that look like this, and it's just like it looks like a pair of pants with a head on it that's walking across like a field or something. It's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen, but people really like them on the internet. So I'm like, we're making one of these things for liminal horror, and it's probably my favorite creature that I wrote for this book.
Hasn't that art has been like all over Blue Sky recently, right? Was Zach and Goblin Archives dropping that?
Yeah, that's one of the ones that Zach put up recently. It's a little spindly leg with a head on top of it, but
yeah.
So he took it in a little different direction compared to what like the quote unquote real creature is, but we wanted that, but it's our version of it. We've got we put in gremlins. Gremlins are goblins effectively, but we changed them to be a little bit more towards like what a gremlin actually is. But if you got a fantasy scenario and you've got goblins, you grab these creatures and you put them in there. We wrote what is another one of my favorites. We put orcs in this book, but they are opportunistic radioactive cannibals, like ORCs.
Nice.
And then we've got, we got these mannequin-like things here. We got a living flame. We've got, there'll be a 2-page spread. It's a colony and a swarm. So this is the general version of what you find in Hungry Hollow, where it's like vermin or insects have overtaken someone's body and they're running around, but they can also pop out of the body and be a swarm of themselves. We have these things that are called rot worms, which are, parasitic little worms that kind of get into you and fuck you up. And then our last two for the lesser horrors are the carrion crier and the scaphiopod, where the carrion crier is just like a fleshy pterodactyl type thing. We knew we needed some kind of flying horror in there because we were kind of lacking on it, so we added this in there. And then the scaphiopods are they're kind of our take on like the deep ones, where we like that trope, these things created by eldritch beings, or at least influenced them by some sense. We know that people like those things too, so we made these scaphiopods pulling from all the way back in the original release of Liminal Horror, the legacy scene, the Plague of Frogs scenario that was written in there, like the little framework that Goblin Archives had written for that. So we're calling back onto that, where our scaphiopods being, frog people instead of fish people. And so, that's just one of our sections. That's the lesser horror. So like I said, we really wanted a good spread of creatures so that you aren't forced into what we think is cool, even if we do think all this is kind of cool.
Yeah. So when is this actually coming to its Backerkit for this one, right?
Yep. We'll be on Backerkit April 15th, unless things change, which as of this stream is next Tuesday.
So right around the corner. Yeah. And you said the initial funding goal currently, quote unquote, is like 30K.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Again, don't quote me on any of the money stuff because it is all in flux. We're trying to figure out how the tariff situation and everything else is going to completely screw us. So any of that stuff is in flux, and it's being frustrating. But the idea is, our original plan was to have that as our base funding goal. That gives us enough to get the cost of manufacturing down, to help with some of the handling woes, and we had a little bit of I guess subcontract help that we need to cover too. So
Amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's kind of Liminal Horror Deluxe. Like, is there any final words you want to give on it or pitch to make sure people back it? But otherwise, I think that's us.
No, I think we've had Die Sugars on to help us out with our Backerkit page, and he's done a fucking fantastic job. So I think that page is really going to sell a lot of folk. But if anybody's watching this and there's any concerns or any questions or whatnot, just come on to the Liminal Horror Discord server. We got links of it everywhere. You can find them on the Liminal Horror website. We got our little channel there to talk about the deluxe edition itself. Any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, ideas, we'd love to hear them. I'm on that pretty much 24/7 because I have Discord notifications set up. So.
Awesome.
Someone in chat just asked about jams going on right now, and I'm going to link that right now. The Horrors of the Americas jam is still going on, right, for like another month.
Yeah, we keep shooting the deadline back. So for those who are watching this that are unfamiliar with it, we've been running the Horrors of the America Jam for like 6 months now. It's been a while. We intentionally made it a long due date because the last jam we ran, people didn't have enough time to finish their entries. So the Horrors of the Americas is we are trying to do a little community drive to make things that are not in the Pacific Northwest. With the idea being that in the end, we will have this one big collection with which you can use to run like a supernatural style horror road trip type campaign, pinging parts around. It's primarily going to be the United States, but we encourage folk to do the entire Americas, North and South America. And we'll see what we get in the end. The goal of this jam, one is for people to make cool stuff. But we also would love folk to do a separate submission to our collection I just talked about, where at the end, we're going to take all the entries that we have been submitted directly to us, at least, bind them together into a book, and then make it print on demand about as close to at cost as we can. Looking at Lulu right now, we'll kind of see where that ends up. But to have this nice little like campaign book made of community, the entries that is, you know, cheap and easy to access, probably free version for the PDF, I think. But yeah, so that we've been bumping the deadline back, one, because I'm going to need time to do the layout on that. And two, we
Fair.
wanted to make sure it was like well out of our way of the deluxe edition. So you got until the end of the deluxe edition's crowdfunding campaign, I think, to get your entries submitted in. It's about a month from the point that this video is being recorded. But super simple stuff. We're talking like 2-page to 10-page type of entries. Mostly just like, here's a location, here's some spooky stuff, here's how your investigators can get involved with it. Come try it out. You know, we intentionally want people who haven't written RPG stuff at all to give it a try. You know, we set up templates. It shouldn't be terribly difficult. You know, it doesn't have to look fancy. Just get your ideas down to paper, put it in the jam, and come talk to us about it.
There we go. So that definitely go check out the horror, the America's Jam. Definitely go. The link has been on the bottom of the page the entire time, but I'll make sure it's below. liminalhorrorrpg.com/deluxe will take you right to the Backerkit page, so that you can pre-follow that, so you can be reminded on the 15th to go and go buy it, go back it, give them your money, so we can have a fun, big, cool game with lots of stuff in it. Josh, always a pleasure to have you on. Always a pleasure to talk about Liminal Horror. At some point, I'm sure we will run the game again here, and we'll definitely be talking about the deluxe edition whenever it gets in our hand. But thank you so much for coming on. We always appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for making the time. This was great.
Great to see you. This is fun. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we will that'll be us for today. Once again, thank you for everyone that was in chat, and everyone have a good day. Bye.